Alright, guys, real quick before we fire up this incredible podcast with Dr. Terry Vermillion, I need to just do a little house cleaning stuff. Number one, this is going up a little late because I had to do some major audio surgery on this thing. The important thing is that Terry comes through crystal clear. My stuff is pretty muddy, but who cares, because I'm not very interesting in this podcast anyway. Terry is definitely carrying the lion's share of the conversation, and it is riveting. So you guys are in for a treat. That's pretty much all I got. Other than that, make sure you stop back early and often to pimp the podcast, because we need the love, people. We've been stuck at around 200 likes on Facebook. I'm seeing sharp declines in the downloads. Like, what's up? Where's the brother love? So get back out there on the interwebs, or hey, if you talk to human beings in a live setting, let's go ahead and let them know about it too, because then they can see the excitement on your face when you're discussing the podcast. So please get out there, spread the word. Love you guys. Here is Dr. Terry Vermillion. Everybody give it the hump, dump, got a little tune called Switch It Funk. Everybody give it the hump, dump, got a little tune called Switch It Funk.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Rudimentality Podcast number 3. My name is Eric Palmer. I'm sitting here with Dr. Terry Vermillion. Dr. Terry Vermillion is the chair for the Department of Music at St. Cloud State University. He's also the professor of percussion studies, sets all the curriculum for those of us in the percussion studio. So, Terry, thank you for joining us this evening.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. It's a pleasure to be here.
Obviously, you and I get to see each other multiple times a day, every single day during the week. But for those of us that aren't familiar, I want to just do a little blast from the past and talk about your background as a percussionist and as a musician. So I want to know, first of all, where did it all begin? Where'd you grow up? Was there a lot of music in your household?
Oh, yeah, sure. Actually, no, there wasn't. My parents were both, basically casual listeners to music. Nobody in my family really came from a musical background whatsoever. I did have,
What did your folks do?
My father was a forester, so he worked for the Forest Service, was traveling quite a bit, did timber management, timber sales, did some forest fighting, forest fire fighting. My mother was a media technologist for the high school and the school district in Missoula, Montana, which is basically where I grew up. And I think up until about third grade, we moved around a lot, the Pacific Northwest, and throughout western Montana and eastern Montana, as my father moved from station to station as a forester. So I saw a lot of the outdoors and gained a great appreciation for the outdoors and for nature. And my father taught me a lot about conservationism and a lot about what nature can offer. And so spent a lot of time in solitude and a lot of time appreciating, what being outdoors can bring. And then we ended up in Missoula, Montana, which is a town about the same size as St. Cloud. And it is also home to the University of Montana, which happens to have a really outstanding school of music.
And that's where you got your bachelor's, is that correct?
Right. So that's where I went for my first degree, which is a music performance degree with an emphasis in percussion. So it was a Bachelor of Music degree, a BM degree. And, I was always an athlete, so I grew up, doing everything from tennis to swimming to baseball to football, did some wrestling, did some track. That was my circle of friends, and I was very physically active. And then, I think what happened was I had two friends. It's a typical story, and I've always felt very strongly that, I guess, kind of this feeling about cheering and rooting for the underdog. And I've always felt very strongly that something I learned along the way with all my experiences with is that anybody can do anything they really want to, with the right amount of focus and with the right amount of influence and the right circle of friends. Hard work creates opportunity, and through networking and being a good person and doing good things for people and doing good work that's 110% as often as you can create a lot of opportunities. So I had two friends. It's a real typical story. One played guitar, one played bass. They were brothers, and they needed a drummer. And so, I went out to the local Sears store and bought a Sears drum set back when they used to sell musical instruments at Sears.
Isn't that funny how you always have two friends that already have an instrument, and they always guilt you into buying the drum set?
Yeah, or they guilted my mother into buying a drum set, right?
Right. It's like, hey, you're not doing anything. Why don't you hit these drums? Because we just need a monkey and somebody whose mom's got a couple $100 in her pocket.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So, typical story. And we started playing Zeppelin cover tunes in Boston and Kansas and all those bands from the early 70s, mid 70s, late 70s. And that's kind of how I got introduced to music. And then I met a really wonderful man. Fred Nelson was the director of bands at Sentinel High School in Missoula, Montana. And Fred was an ex-Army sergeant, so he ran an extremely efficient, well-organized program. But he was an individual who had a heart of gold. And so Fred knew my mother because she worked in the media department at the high school. And so then came to know me, and he took me under his wing, and he taught me to read and got me introduced to staff notation and got me into the concert band and into the jazz band, and that's where I met a whole new group of friends and a whole new group of influences, because there were some really great musicians in Fred's program, and they had a profound influence on focusing my energies away from being a hooligan. And it can sound as corny as can be, but he really did focus my pathway and my energies. And by the time I got done, so that was like the summer before my senior year, my first taste of being in a band and in being involved in music.
Oh, so it was that late?
It was very, very late.
In organized music, if you will.
Yeah, I was on the wrestling squad for the first 2 years. I played football, and everybody got bigger than me, and I got beat up one too many times.
Right.
And I said, you know what? I don't like pain.
I'd rather sit behind the kit and get the chicks.
Yeah, exactly. Get some real positive attention, and it really is one of the things I've always believed about music, is that it's really self-affirming. When you are really into it and you do really well, it can pay off with a lot of self-confidence, and you feel like you've achieved something. And a lot of that also came from my dad. He always talked a lot about 99% sweat and 1% inspiration, and anything good anything hard is worth doing,
Right.
and it's going to take a lot of hard work. And so a lot of those traditional values that he brought us up under, as a man of nature and a forester, he knew that nothing came easy. And so I think between Fred Nelson and my father, I decided all I wanted to do was music. And so then, of course, I lived in a town that had a great university and a great school of music. So I said, okay, I guess I'll go to college.
So that brought you to the University of Montana.
Yep.
And was it there that you were rewarded for your improvisational jazz playing?
Well, no.
Did that come later?
Yeah, really quite a bit later. Of course, that's where I met another group of friends that were, again, really great musicians. And I also had kind of heard by reading the liner notes on albums, LPs, and by paying attention to interviews and articles, people were talking a lot about surround yourself with musicians that are better than yourself, and you will continue to grow. And so that's what happened there at the University of Montana. There was a whole group of great jazz musicians under Lance Boyd, who just recently retired, great jazz band instructor, trombonist, really great director of bands, Thomas Cook, and a good school of music. And so it really kicked my butt because I was going into a performance degree at a university not knowing where middle C was on the piano, having never had piano lessons, never sung a note in my life. And so I was really challenged. Those first 2 years were really, really difficult.
Wow, that must have been crazy to walk into that studio and see all these other guys that are, have been studying this for years, over a decade probably almost at that point. And
yeah, a lot of those musicians, It was also another interesting situation there. There was no percussion teacher. It was graduate assistants. So they had a graduate program, and they did not have a full-time percussion teacher. So they would always hire a percussionist or look for a percussionist who wanted to come and do their master's program. And then that individual, as a graduate student, would teach the undergraduate percussionist. So I had 4 different teachers, basically almost a new teacher every year. But my first 2 years there, the fella, his name was Larry Nielsen, and Larry ended up becoming director of bands in another town in Montana, Helena, Montana. And Larry grew up as an orchestral percussionist, so he really got me started with a lot of discipline, a lot of reading, a lot of sight reading, really held me, firm for those first 2 years. And that's what it really takes. It really takes a really great teacher to set the path for you, to give you the inspiration, to show you what you got to do, and where you got to go, and how hard you have to work. And with that, and a program that allowed me to, much like St. Cloud State, allows you to be in the wind ensemble, in the jazz band, in the orchestra. I played with the Missoula Symphony. I worked for the Missoula Children's Theater all the time. There was just all of these opportunities, just like here in St. Cloud, where if you can work hard enough, you can get all those opportunities, because there's not a major metropolitan area like the Twin Cities that provides really, really intense competition, which can turn negative, especially if you're not being given opportunities, because there's graduate students and doctoral students.
I've heard a lot from friends that have attended the U of M, and many that have actually left, that's one of the things that drove them away, was the size of the studio and the amount of competition down there. If you weren't really on top of your A game coming in from day one and willing to take it to the next level and do whatever it takes, you just didn't stand a chance. It was not the kind of environment that necessarily was best for people that were still figuring out what they were doing or were coming in with less experience. And I know it burnt them out really quickly, because they just didn't have the expectation that I was going to have to work this hard if I wanted to make it work.
Well, that's and again, I really respect the program down at the University of Minnesota and Fernando Mesa and all the people down there, and it is very, very difficult for a student who has very little background going into college to major in music when you're at a large institution like that.
Right.
It's why the adage or the old saying, most kids start playing music, when they're 3 or 4 or 5 years old, everything from kinder music to Suzuki or fifth or sixth grade band program.
Yeah.
So it's one of the things that I mean, I didn't come from a big school, so as an underdog, I came to value. I always wanted to grow up to be a teacher that would take students under their wing, take people under my wing, and try and show them everything I know about making music and about being a musician. And that's what I like about St. Cloud. It gives me that opportunity to do that, and I can work with a student who's only been in rock bands or a student that's only been in pep bands in school, and they can come to college, they are barely learning to read music, and 60% of the time they can make it with a lot of hard work, and the other 30 or 40% of the time they realize that that they're not going to be able to make it.
So what happens at this point is we have a little bit of a cutout connection issue, and the audio gets really crappy. So basically, what I'm saying to Terry leading up to his response here is that there's a lot of kids that have only drumline experience. They join the drumline at some point during their high school career, and then decide this is what I want to do for the rest of my life is play drums, so I'm going to go to college for it. And Terry just goes on to comment on his experience with students that come from that kind of background. So here it is.
Yeah, and actually, I have great respect for the drumline experience, and my strongest students have had that experience. When you come with the chops and the hands and the rhythmic understanding that you get from a drumline experience, you can get by on that while you're developing your reading ability, or while you're gaining an orchestral experience that's very, very different from a drum line. And I just love working with that caliber of musician, and I would highly encourage, and I wish I had that opportunity. There was a drum line in Billings, Montana, and it was a bit like Minnesota Brass, where people from all across Montana were, participating, but I didn't have the means to drive, 5.5 hours to Billings.
Right.
Montana's a big state.
Yeah, I have a friend that lives in Great Falls, and was out there for the wedding, and I got an idea of the immensity of that place.
It's a long state.
Absolutely.
And there was a really great teacher there, Len Drosty, and Len was turning out, drumline champions. I mean, he always had kids. They used to tell me Len used to make students play their solos while reading from a book.
What?
Yeah, so they had to know their solo so well from memory, then they would have to open up a book and literally read from the book while they were playing their solo.
Wow.
Really, really amazing old school fella.
Yeah, definitely. Man, crazy.
Yeah.
So that brings us up to through the kind of the bachelor's process. So after that, at what point did you decide, you know what, I'm going to go all the way with this? And did you decide you wanted to be a teacher, or were you still thinking the performing track?
I knew from what people had told me that I would be teaching, but I certainly wasn't focused on that.
I like how you phrased that.
Yes, Terry, you're going to be teaching some private lessons at a music store or at your home or whatever. And I was ready to go conquer the world like everybody else. And it just happened that there was a jazz festival that happens every year in Missoula at the University of Montana. And I was playing with the jazz ensemble, and Gene Aiken, who was the jazz studies director from the University of Northern Colorado, was there as an adjudicator. And Gene was hanging out for the evening concert, and I can't remember, I think it might have been Bill Watchus on trombone, and Bill was playing with the band, and I had done a really good job preparing, and Gene came up afterwards and he said, introduced himself and basically recruited me and said, hey, we're ready to offer you a graduate assistantship, and let's talk. And so then, yes, of course, the next day, right, I call him up and we talk, and it turns out that then I went down to the University of Northern Colorado in Greeley, Colorado, and started my Master of Music degree, another performance degree. And they gave me basically a graduate assistantship for a year. And so I was doing some office work, basically, for the School of Music. And then in my second and third year, I stuck around for a third year because they offered me a teaching assistantship. Now, that involved teaching incoming freshman percussion lessons and also directing the third percussion ensemble. And since my secondary emphasis in my master's was jazz studies, along with percussion performance, they gave me, of all things, Gene Aiken gave me the third vocal jazz group. And,
wow.
and so never sung a note in my life, But Gene taught me, he said, listen, you know what? You know jazz phrasing. You know how to sing a jazz line. You know the articulation. You've been in big bands forever. All you have to do is get the singers to sing the words like a jazz horn player, and you'll have a great jazz choir.
So that's where you get all those great descriptors when we're in percussion ensemble playing jazzy kind of figures, and it just comes out of nowhere. And it's like,
absolutely,
sounds like a vocal jazz studies major right there.
Yep. And so all those experiences you get in graduate school and all those experiences you get in undergraduate program, years later they start to sink in and you start to connect the dots. And being a great teacher is all about finding different angles to get your point across. And every student has a different background, and every student comes with a different perspective and a different set of experiences. So you can't just say the same thing to a group of students and expect them all to get it.
Right.
You have to try and pay attention to who they are, where they've been, what they've done, what they're into, and then you need to try and describe it in musical terms that they'll understand so they can get your point about what you want the music to say.
Mm-hmm. And that's different, I suppose, you've seen for every single student you've ever had.
Pretty much, yep, every single one, There's a lot of great exercises that teachers will do when they first start teaching a class, and many of those exercises involve getting the students to speak about themselves, to tell you a little bit about who they are and where they've been, and if you can unpack a little bit of that luggage that they bring, because every student brings different luggage and different baggage to the class. If you can unpack that a little bit, you can tailor your teaching to hopefully have a deeper impact on that group of students.
Absolutely, that makes a ton of sense. And this is actually a really great segue into, I wanted to ask you, since your time at St. Cloud State, have you seen, let's see, when did you first come to St. Cloud State, Terry?
1990.
1990. So, let's see, we're looking at 22 years, going on 23, is that right?
Yep, you're a math major. Good job.
Wow, yeah. Close enough. So have you seen any kind of difference in the individual student or the classes that have come through St. Cloud State over those 22 years? And is it something that you feel has been impacted by outside forces such as technology, obviously, or just the changes that we've seen in society with the economy over the last few years, and you've seen that in the past, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel that students are going to be students and you still just have to, tailor that, or do you see real distinct themes with, throughout the years that you've been at St. Cloud State?
To be really honest, I really haven't seen any kind of a drastic change. There are some students who really know exactly what they want to do. Some that will say, you know what, I really want to be a performance major, and I love performing, and I love the life of the performer, and I want to go on to graduate school, and maybe I'll end up teaching college, teaching at a university or something. Then there are students who really, I really want to be a music teacher. And so I'm here to get my music education degree, and I want to give back to my community and give back to society the same way my band director or choir director or orchestra director did, And then there are a whole bunch of students who are in college to explore and find out exactly which direction they want to go in. They don't have the answer, and they don't know exactly what they want to do. And that those, three types of students, and then I suppose another class of student that really has very multiple interests, And so yes, I want to major in music, and but you know what? I really love graphic design, or I really love photography or art, or I've always been interested in business management, or health sciences and psychology, So they have multiple interests. So fortunately, we have degree programs at St. Cloud State that are directed exactly at those individuals. We have a Bachelor of Arts degree, the BA degree in music, that is small enough that it allows room for a double major.
Right.
We have a great Bachelor of Arts program with an emphasis in composition for those who really are excited by the creative process of, composing music. We have a composition and new media emphasis for students who are really excited and have always been creating music in the computer. They've always been techies and can tear a transistor radio apart and rewire it back into some weird kind of a musical instrument, and have always been able to record their own stuff in their bedroom and do their own audio editing and all of that. So they learn about composition, but they realize their compositional energies through the computer or other digital media. We've always had a very strong music education program, and we've always had a very strong performance program for those who want to take advantage of all the private lessons and all of the higher division theory courses and music history courses, and kind of as a preparatory to go on to graduate school.
Absolutely. So looking forward, are there any big, not necessarily big changes, but any changes or additions you would like to see in the curriculum that's available? And they could be specific to the percussion studio or to the just any music program at St. Cloud State as a whole. And if so, how would you augment that?
I think the one of the, that's a really open question. But one of the, I really want our program to be a program of the 21st century. I want it to address the needs, especially in technology, that every student, no matter if they're going to go into a composition or a composition in new media, or whether they're going into music education, or whether they're going to go on and be a performance major, I want them to be very, very comfortable with the technologies that can increase their creative output and help them connect and network, help them express themselves on a variety of levels. Maybe it's how to build your own website. Maybe it's how to record your own music through different recording technologies. Maybe it's editing your own music. Maybe it's your own notational software that you can notate your own scores. There's just so much happening with integration of technology into music and teaching. That's one direction we're really pushing hard for. And I think with Dr. Scott Miller and Christian Twombly and Melissa Krause, and even in the music education area with Dr. Marcelin Smale, those are some of the leaders that are really helping us stay on the cutting edge of technology and music as it's applied to those different degree tracks.
Absolutely, and I would definitely agree in my experience over the last few years that I feel like that concept has definitely become more apparent every single year that I've been at St. Cloud State. And it's something that I really appreciate because obviously we're doing this right now, and I love, the concept of building websites and recording music and writing music, and and I have all those options available to me, which is awesome.
Yep, and I know St. Cloud State has taken that certainly as part of their strategic plan and their initiatives as a university, that technology is going to play a big role, and our students need to be prepared for that. And it's a little bit difficult right now in a financial climate that's very conservative. So we have to do what we can. We have to work pretty hard to make sure that we can stay up with all the equipment and the technologies.
Right.
I think the other thing I would say too is the other initiative is that the old paradigms of a traditional band, choir, and orchestra program are disappearing. And yes, they need to be strong. Our students still in high school and in college, the foundation for why they love music is because they had a great experience in a band, a choir, or an orchestra, or a pep band, or a sports band, or a drumline.
Some kind of organized musical activity.
Organized musical activity, performing in public. That's the foundation for it. But it's so diverse right now that high school programs need to be teaching finale. They need to teach guitar. They need to teach piano and theory. There need to be classes on the use of GarageBand and other recording and audio editing technologies. And music educators need to be able to present a program that's very diverse, and performance majors need to have a very diverse skill set. And that's why the Bachelor of Arts degree, the BA Liberal Arts Music degree, is designed that you can double major, because you need to have a wide variety of skills, a wide variety of abilities, from reading to writing to comprehension to critical thinking to argument making to interpersonal communication. You have to be able to design your own business cards and websites and market yourself. And I think a liberal arts education delivers all of that. And when you graduate then with a liberal arts degree, say it with a music emphasis, a music degree, you can get out in the job field and compete for any job you want. Now,
essentially create your own career.
Correct. It's creating a life in music, and some people may get lucky and they go get a job working for Make Music or Smart Music, or they go get a job with Time Warner, or they go get a job as a performer with a symphony orchestra, That's not necessarily the norm, and that's maybe not necessarily the norm in business either. You may get a degree in marketing or accounting, but you're doing something else for a while, The statistic that kind of floats out there is there's really only about 30% of college graduates that actually go out and get a job in their field in the first 2 to 3 or 4 years. But what you got to be prepared to do is just go out and get a job and be a strong competitor for that until you can find a job in your field. That's just the way the market is right now. Now, the one exception for that would be music education. And even though there's a lot of bad press out there about districts making cuts and consolidations happening and whatnot, there's also a lot of movement. And a lot of people are moving around, and jobs are opening up, a lot of positions shifting and stuff.
Well, and it definitely seems to me, all the articles and news stories I've been seeing lately, that we're going to reach a point, I don't know if it's going to be in 3-6 months or if it's going to be 5-10 years, but we're coming to this kind of singularity in education where the format is going to have to change, be it how the unions are structured, or how teachers are being assessed, or how they're being supported by the government or by the populace, what have you, because there's so much upheaval right now and such strong opinions on what makes a good teacher. Is it teaching to the test, or is it the experience of the student? And there's been so many articles lately. I just feel like we're getting really close to this point where it's just going to blow up, and hopefully for the best, obviously, since I plan on being a teacher here.
Right.
But, and there's definitely opportunities, and I see that on the Percussive Arts Society message boards every day. Or every week, I should say. I get an update with, different job openings and opportunities, and there's definitely money out there if you're willing to prepare yourself and do a little traveling.
Oh, absolutely. And yes, and there are lots of statistics out there about the generation of teachers that are going to age out and go into retirement. And there is going to be a bubble that's going to open up a lot of jobs around the nation. The other thing that people really need to think about is they need to think international.
Absolutely.
And that American-trained teachers are highly valued around the world. So, I would tell people to maybe think about go and teach English in another country. Go and teach some of those other skills. Go and teach music somewhere. We just threw out some kind of a announcement. It was 2 or 3 months ago. They were looking for a band director in where was it? I want to say it was in India, but it was an international position, and they were looking for a director of bands at a parochial school.
Oh, I could definitely handle something like that.
Yeah, wouldn't that be kind of fun?
Well, beat some winners around here.
Yeah, and it's so I'm very optimistic, and I don't buy into the doom and gloom, and I've heard very painful stories, and I know people are being shifted around and forced to go to 2 or 3 different schools, and their lives are being disrupted, and I feel for them. But I think that the future is fine for music teachers and for musicians in general. You look everywhere in our society, and there's music.
Yeah.
It's in the elevator, it's on the advertisements, it's on the internet. Tell me where there's not music, and I think I'll be surprised.
Right, exactly. And the access is unprecedented. It's all instantaneous now.
Well, it is, and it really is all about networking and connecting and making sure that all of your friends respect you, and all of your friends know your capabilities. For instance, both Matt Nelson and I think Devin Tomzik, I think they both got jobs this summer editing audio for an audiobook company in the cities.
That's awesome. I had no idea about that.
Yeah, so, I think through Dr. Miller, he got a phone call from this audiobook company, and they're like, man, we really need students who have audio editing ability, and we have all of this tons and tons of footage that needs to be edited down. There's the old school in me, footage.
Right. Yeah.
Like it's a reel-to-reel tape or something.
Yeah, you got to get out the scissors.
And the splicing tape. But there again, so he was yes, I have those skills. I was in the music technology class that everybody took, and of course Matt's a new media and composition major, so
just whiz with that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and Devin as well,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Cool, man. Well, I'm going to backtrack slightly to your comment on the director position in India, and want to inquire about your experience studying in Indonesia.
Oh yeah, that was a really fantastic opportunity. It's just amazing how things just fall into your lap. When you're known for being open-minded and known for being adventurous and willing to tackle new things and new initiatives. So it was a faculty member. Her name was Joan Miller, and she was putting together a Fulbright grant, and so through the Fulbright Association, took 14 Minnesota teachers, some art teachers, language teachers, dance teachers, theater teachers, creative writing, and music, took 14 of us over to Indonesia. And so it was Bali and Java, and we basically just did a cultural arts tour. So we attended performances, lectures, studied the music, studied the instruments. We saw how they were made. We went to a foundry and saw them make all the gongs for the gamelan.
Awesome.
It was a really great, very, very, eye-opening experience.
And when was it that you went over there?
That was during the summer of 1993.
93, okay.
And, for me, in 1992, I had studied with Wallace Hill down in Minneapolis, and Wallace is a Cuban percussionist that owned and operated a Minneapolis drum store, and he made his own djembe, made his own conga, shekere, and different cajon, and his wife taught dance and singing, and so they had sessions every night, and you could take classes and take lessons, and so I had been introduced to world drumming and world music through Wallace. We studied Afro-Cuban rumba, and then to go to Bali and study gamelan kind of set me down this pathway of understanding that so many non-Western cultures have strong drumming traditions. And so, here at St. Cloud State, we have a Japanese taiko club. It's a student organization, and they have a set of taiko drums, and they organize as a student organization, and they practice, and they have some teachers, and they do performances. Of course, we do the Brazilian samba, the carnival samba. That was something I studied while I was in graduate school around 1995. And when I was at Greeley, Colorado, I went back for a couple summers to start working on my doctorate. And the Naropa Institute is in Boulder, Colorado, and they have a lot of international teachers that come and stay as residencies and whatnot. And they happen to have a Brazilian percussionist, Felipe Brun. And Felipe was teaching his version of Carnival Samba.
Awesome. And did that inspire you to, at the time, did you have that available at St. Cloud State, or is that something that you took from your experience there and brought back to St. Cloud State?
Right. It was like that. I had after I had studied with Wallace Hill in 1992, I started an Afro-Cuban drumming group. Mm-hmm. And so I was doing percussion ensemble and the Afro-Cuban drumming group. And then when I learned about the gamelan, and we ended up with a set of gamelan instruments for about 7 years, and I learned about the carnival samba, and we had the taiko drums, the student organization. I kind of went a little more broad with it and started the World Drumming Group. Mm-hmm. And so one semester we would do gamelan, and another semester we would do carnival samba, and another semester we would do Afro-Cuban. And then that set of instruments, the gamelan instruments, left St. Cloud State and went back down to the College of St. Kate's down in the cities for a while. And I'm not even really sure where it's at right now.
Oh, interesting. So it's kind of been on a tour since then.
Yeah.
For all we know.
Yeah, for all we know, yeah.
Interesting. Cool. Well, I also, besides that, I also wanted to ask you about your studies with Peter Erskine and how that came about, and then what you took away from that experience. Obviously, for those that aren't aware, I realize that I'm of a different generation than some of my peers. Peter Erskine is a badass drum set player and just all-around great percussionist. So, Terry, if you could speak to that a little bit, I'd really appreciate it.
Yeah, there again, I really benefited from a great mentor and teacher. Gene Aiken, as I mentioned before, the fellow who recruited me down to Greeley, Colorado, and University of Northern Colorado. Gene, for all of his graduate students, would basically force us to write a National Endowment of the Arts Jazz Study Grant. And that was in 1989 that I wrote my grant.
And wrote your own grant?
Yeah, it comes, like any other grant. It's got instructions. You download it and fill it out and send it in,
See, now this is only, the only reason I use that kind of exclamation is because I've been involved with nonprofit organizations
Yep.
that have been told they need to hire specific individuals to strictly write grants 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Right.
And it put the fear in me, but that's incredible.
Yeah, so he told us, there was probably, probably 12 of us that were kind of in the jazz studies program. I was working on my performance degree, but I was also working in jazz studies, and I took a class called jazz pedagogy, and so it was all about teaching jazz, and it was a very practical class, and one of the practicalities was, you're going to learn to write a grant. So here's the application. Let's talk about a project, and my project was to go study drums with Pete Erskine down in California, and it just happened that Gene owned a second home. He had a home in California, so he would spend a lot of time in California, and he was kind of networked with the people who were in film and television down there, and then he would come and teach for several weeks at a time up in Colorado, and he's going back and forth all the time. So he happened to live in Sherman Oaks, and Pete Erskine just lived down in Santa Monica, so it was really just like a 15 or 20-minute drive. So yeah, he said, hey, you're going to write a grant. I said, okay, great. So at that time, the National Endowment for the Arts was very strong, well-funded. But since then, they've discontinued this jazz study grant. But I was fortunate enough to probably be one of the last batch of students to tap into that.
That is awesome. So you went out to California.
Yep.
You're hanging out on the beach, doing things, playing drums on the beach, whatnot.
Right.
What was the kind of structure for your time with Mr. Erskine?
Well, it was 6 weeks. We were to study 3 times a week, and then I was to practice and go to as many performances as I can and soak up the scene. And Peter took me to a bunch of his recording sessions, so I got to sit and watch him record. And then I would hang out at the studio and watch other people record. Got to see Jeff Porcaro do a session. I know of
your love for Jeff Porcaro.
Oh my God! If you're a drum set player and you don't love Jeff Porcaro, you got to have something wrong.
Absolutely.
But that was a real eye opener. Peter went through a transition of his own where he had been in some really big bands. He'd been in Weather Report and Steps Ahead, and he got to a point where he started listening to his own recordings and realized that he was maybe blowing a lot of steam and pulling a lot of chops and trying to be a real impressive fusion drummer, but his time and his feel weren't as sacred as it should have been. And so he set out on his own pathway to really define a quarter note pulse and exactly what it means to play in time and with good feel, and reinvented his own playing to the point where he's where he is right now. And so he pretty much slam dunked me with that realization in my own playing. So we would sit for a good 45 minutes playing quarter notes and talk about my posture and my breathing, and basically took me way back to square one to kind of iron out all the wrinkles that I didn't iron out the first time.
Wow. And how long, was that like the first week? was that like the first 4 weeks? How long until you started getting to more advanced? Well, obviously it's a very advanced concept of having to develop time.
Yeah.
But at what point did you guys kind of progress to just train fours? And did that ever happen?
Not really. We did some playing back and forth. His studio at the time was his garage, and he had converted the garage, had it drywalled, had all sorts of keyboards and recording gear of that era, 1989, drum machines and synthesizers and outboard gear, and he had his own little studio there. And
it must have been a big garage to fit all those oversized 80s electronics.
Yeah, good old 2-car garage, and so that was out in his backyard, and we got into song structure and we got into soloing, and he talked a lot about melody, and we learned to play jazz standards on the snare drum, and then take them and start using the bass drum and snare drum and bring in the tom-toms, and but always trying to start from a melody, and the melody of the tune and the rhythm of the tune, and then we talked about articulations, long and short notes, and different ways to make long and short sounds, and really a lot of the basic stuff that nobody bothered to teach me in college.
Right.
Yeah. So, backtracking like that.
Man, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So if there was... would you say that was the biggest thing that you took away from that experience? Was like, wow, man, I wish I or known that from all that college time.
I think the biggest thing was just a sense of humbleness.
Yeah.
Just a sense of, what, you've got a lot of work to do in your own playing, so don't be so haughty-taughty about it, and don't get all, built up about it.
Come on now, Mr. Fulbright.
Interesting. Right.
Well, I've got one more thing I want to touch on, and we'll get to the fun stuff, the listener questions, and some other more pointed question and answer stuff. And the one thing I wanted to talk about was your experience with Trio Lorca at Carnegie Hall this past year.
Sure.
Or earlier this year, I guess I should say. Is that more accurate?
Yeah, March 16th.
Yeah. Awesome. So, for those of you that don't know, Dr. Vermillion participates in a group called Trio Lorca, which I will let him expand upon so that I don't represent it non-accurate.
Yeah, sure. Trio Lorca is a faculty trio at St. Cloud State, and it's soprano, flute, and percussion. And we just submitted an audition CD to a performing arts series that was organized by an organization called Distinguished Concert Artists in New York, and then made it onto a performing arts series that was hosted at Carnegie Hall.
Yeah, that's great. And then how was, I know you and I personally talked a little bit about your experience out there, but just for the listeners, if you could kind of walk them through what it's like to go into that really historically amazing hall, and just the whole process of being in New York and that whole experience.
I'd never been to New York, and so I was really excited to be there. We stayed at Park Central Hotel, which is just a block away from Carnegie Hall,
awesome.
Right there in Manhattan. And, so it's just another, in one level, yeah, it's Carnegie Hall, but on another level, it's just another performing space. It happens to have a lot of history and happens to have, a long tradition. And so it was humbling to be there and very, very exciting. It's my first, not my first professional experience. I've worked with the Minnesota Orchestra and, the Dallas Brass and the Boston Brass, and I've had those experiences, but, stage hands and technicians and ushers that were all unionized, and they're going to move your equipment for you, they're going to set it up for you, then you're going to go and reposition it, and don't touch this, don't touch that, we'll take care of that, we'll do this for you. But,
which is so crazy coming from here in Minnesota, where it's like, come on, get it done, let's go, everybody chips in, and
right.
get in and get out, yeah.
You know, and you know, I think my impression really was that I was going to step into this really big, nasty beast, you know. But I was just myself, and easy to talk to, and not demanding, with no attitude. And the stagehands were like, okay, this is just another regular guy. I don't have to be a real, you know, tough ass or anything. So.
Right, we don't have to pick all the yellow M&Ms out, so it's
right.
an easy night.
Yeah, and so once they understood that we were cool and that we weren't going to be all, you know, formal, they were willing to lend a hand and go the extra mile. My percussion gear was rented, of course, and so the rental company puts everything together in these huge bins. They're like laundry bins you see at a hotel. And they unload the stuff from their truck. The truck was like an hour late for our dress rehearsal. So we missed an hour of our dress rehearsal, and I'm kind of freaking out, you know.
Because you still got setup time left.
Right, I still got to get it set up. We have to be off stage by 5 because of the union break for dinner. We can't get back on stage until 6:30, and the concert starts at 8, and we have to be off stage by, you know, so... Everything's on a schedule and everything's laid out very professionally. You know, they've been doing this for hundreds of years.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I know all of us back at St. Cloud State were really excited for you guys, and and it sounded like you had a great reception out there.
Yeah, it went really well. You know, we had a good audience, and we brought back enough money to record our own CD. So, you know, here in the next year, we'll be able to get our own CD recorded and kind of document that experience.
That's awesome. Well, when we have more details about a release date on that, I will definitely be posting that information on rudimentality.com.
Cool.
And, of course, linking back to information about Trio Lorca and St. Cloud State's music program and yourself, so that those that are checking this episode of our podcast out can go find it.
Awesome. So how about those viewer questions?
Okay.
Listener questions.
Let's start with the most ridiculous. And this is from our friend Nathan, yours and mine.
Of course.
What is your opinion on the continuation of the Star Wars series? Should there be any new films?
Oh, leave it to Nathan. You got to be kidding.
This is the potpourri segment, if you will.
Oh, man. Oh, what the heck? How would I have an opinion about that? I loved the Star Wars series. I loved all the movies. And if they're going to make another one, fine, but it better be just as good as the first 6.
Okay, fair enough. All right, the second one was from Alex, and this is actually one that you already partially addressed earlier, which is he wanted to know your thoughts on the drum corps activity.
Oh, right, yeah. You know, like I said before, man, what a fantastic experience. The high level of artistry and the high level of accomplishment, the use of the hands and the mechanism of the bounce and the stick and the grip and the rebound, the rhythmic foundation, the development of listening skills, the ability to work in a squad or a group that really depends on each other, you know, all of those features. And I know I missed a ton, you know, but it's a great experience, as long as it's accompanied with open-mindedness. And the one thing about human nature that's really, really interesting, I'm reading a autobiography of Bill Bruford's. Bill Bruford was the drummer for Yes, and then King Crimson, and then Earthworks, and he's a very intellectually oriented British fellow.
Not to mention an incredible talent.
Oh, God, yeah. Great drummer, you know, who recently retired from performing, but he, and I've made these observations, you know, in the past through other musicians, but we can get caught in a loop of always wanting to reproduce what we did yesterday. And, for instance, the American public, or even whatever, the international public of pop music, they want to hear Alanis Morissette do another CD that sounded just like Alanis Morissette's other CD.
Right. This is very true.
You know, and as musicians, we can get caught in wanting to replicate our past successes, because it was a success and because we received such positive feedback, we tend to want to reproduce that, and we can get stuck in a rut if that's all we're going to do. And so I've encountered, and I know lots of other teachers can back me up, students who have achieved a high level of success in drum corps and drum line, and that's all they want to do, almost like they're addicted to the candy, and it's just, this is all I want to do, I'm really good at it, I love it, And oftentimes that comes at the expense of other experiences that could grow them as musicians. It could grow them as employable musicians,
Right. And I think that's really, if you want to put a fine point on it, that's really where it comes down to, because as we talked about at our master class last Friday, there's only so much work you can do. It's a very niche market, the marching band, drumline, drum corps market, and obviously it's growing every day and it's getting more and more popular, but there is not necessarily a great way to make a living unless you really have, number one, a lot of resources available to you, a ton of experience in that field, and a network that is more massive than I can imagine right now.
Yeah.
At this point in my life. So, I think you really nailed it there. It should be, in my opinion, having come out of that activity and walked into the more conservatory style of, what we're experiencing in the percussion studio at St. Cloud State. And when I say conservatory, I don't mean old-fashioned. I just mean traditional concert percussion.
Right.
I realized very quickly that the thing I needed to focus on was my work at St. Cloud State, because there is such a wider variety of instruments, of techniques, of listening situations, of environmental situations, and there's just a lot more going on. And I think that was, if anything, more reinforced by my experience with Minnesota Brass over the last 2 summers. Because as you get more comfortable doing that activity, you're on a field, you realize that eventually all stadiums kind of sound the same. Some are boomier than others, but you're still going to get the splashback from the concrete wall 30 feet in front of you.
Yeah.
And yes, moving around on the field and knowing where to listen and when and get cues, but those are all things that are way more critical in a concert environment. I mean, you need to know when the French horns are being cued, at what dynamic level, so that you're, fitting within the ensemble. It's a much more nuanced process, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
Sure. And what I'm getting from this part of the Bruford autobiography that I'm reading is, I'm at the point where he left the band, yes. And everybody's like, oh my God, why did you leave that band? I mean, they were achieving international success. They had, like 5 gold records. But what he realized is that he would be trapped in this band that was going to do nothing but recreate these songs they had recorded on a CD, on an LP at that time, And so he didn't see a future in which he could expand his own and explore his own creativity.
It's very interesting.
It really struck me. And also, talking about friends that I've had and friends that he spoke about in his book who were professional orchestral musicians, and how bored they get playing the same Beethoven symphony, for a 30-year career.
Because that's what sells tickets.
Right, so if a concert musician, say, that has achieved the highest level, hey, I made it in the Chicago Symphony. Well, Ted Adkats left the Chicago Symphony so he could join a rock band, because...
That guy's out of his mind.
Well,
whatever setup you give him for an orchestral setting. I mean...
Right.
Yeah.
And so... taking it back to the drumline experience, as long as a student, as long as an individual in any situation, and especially in that drumline situation, knows when enough is enough, I've achieved enough and I'm ready to move on, then I think it's really, really healthy. And I love it. And my strongest students come from that background.
Absolutely. And something I tell a lot of the young guys that are teaching is that, I don't know if you guys know this, being in music education, but you will teach a marching band when you get a job, when you leave here.
Right.
So there's going to be plenty of time for marching band.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, let's move on. I've got a list of a couple of questions here that I just kind of charged up. And the first is, what is your favorite individual, group, or ensemble to play with? And it could be at any point in your life or present day.
Well, that's a tough one. I would have to say, though, that I'm proudest of the work that I did with University of Northern Colorado's Jazz Lab 1. Mm-hmm. And every year a CD was produced, and I have really always go back and listen to those. And, there again, I was surrounded by graduate students who were just killer players, and a jazz director who really knew how to get the most out of the band. And that was probably one of the greatest experiences I've had.
That's awesome, man. So, what are you listening to right now? Like, if you opened your iPhone or your iPod or iTunes, what would be the first thing to pop up on Genius for you?
Gosh, that's a tough one too. Adam Deitch is the fella's name. I really like Adam. He's a soul funkster, young guy. He's a producer. He has a band called Lettuce, and Lettuce is just a raging funk band. They're all young bloods, and they write and perform old school funk tunes that pay homage to that.
All right. Well, unfortunately, at that point in our conversation, GarageBand decided that we had reached our recording limit, since we were recording on Terry's machine instead of mine through Skype. So I want to thank, number one, Dr. Terry Vermillion for coming in and doing the podcast. I know he's extremely busy with all of his responsibilities at St. Cloud State and performing with various ensembles, and so Terry, thank you so much for doing that. Hope to have you back on in the future. If you would like to learn more about the music program at St. Cloud State University, or you are interested in taking private lessons with Dr. Vermillion, you can head over to stcloudstate.edu/music. That's stcloudstate.edu/music. Also, I want to thank all of you for listening. Make sure that you go ahead and like us on our Facebook fan page, facebook.com/rudimentality. Follow us on Twitter, twitter.com/rudimentality. Subscribe on iTunes, Rudimentality. Go ahead and search that up in the podcast section of iTunes. Subscribe for free. Leave us a 5-star rating. You know you want to. Leave us a review on there. And, of course, you can always just go straight to the source, rudimentality.com, for all your rudimental drumming needs and percussion-related podcast extravaganzas. My name is Eric Palmer. Thanks again for listening. Make sure you tell a friend and keep on drumming.